What if everything you thought you knew about the origins of Russia and Ukraine was just the tip of the iceberg? Beneath the surface of these vast lands lies a story filled with lost civilizations, ruthless invaders, and secrets that have been buried for thousands of years. Imagine a world where ancient tribes roamed endless grasslands, leaving behind nothing but mysterious burial mounds and silent graves. These lands have witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the clash of legendary warriors, and betrayals that would shape the fate of millions. But how did a scattered collection of tribes and wandering nomads transform into the powerful nations we know today? And what hidden forces were at play behind the scenes, forces that would spark wars, topple dynasties, and leave entire cities in ruins? As we peel back the layers of history, we'll uncover shocking truths, untold legends, and the dark side of ambition that drove men to conquer, destroy, and rebuild. The real story of Russia and Ukraine's beginnings is far more dramatic and far more mysterious than most people realize. So, what secrets are still waiting to be discovered beneath the ancient steppe? And how did these lands survive centuries of chaos, invasion, and near extinction? The answers might just change everything you thought you knew about the birth of a nation. But to understand how it all began, we have to go back to a time before kings and empires, when the only clues to the past were hidden deep beneath the earth. Long before the rise of cities or the forging of kingdoms, the lands that would become Russia and Ukraine were a wild, untamed frontier. Here, mysterious Bronze Age cultures thrived, leaving behind almost no written records, only haunting traces of their existence scattered across the endless steppe. The most striking of these remnants are the kurgans, massive burial mounds that still dot the landscape, rising like silent sentinels above the grasslands. For centuries, these ancient tombs have puzzled archaeologists and fueled speculation about the people who built them. Some believe the kurgans hide treasures and secrets that could rewrite history, while others whisper about lost rituals and forgotten gods buried alongside their chieftains. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus called these enigmatic people the Scythians, fierce nomads who ruled the steppe with unmatched skill and brutality. Legends describe them as master horsemen, feared by their enemies and respected by their allies. But despite their reputation, so much about the Scythians remains shrouded in mystery. What drove them to create such elaborate burial sites? Were they protecting their dead from grave robbers, or was there something even more valuable hidden beneath the earth? Some modern researchers suggest that the Scythians' true origins are still unknown, with DNA evidence hinting at connections to distant lands and lost tribes. As centuries passed, wave after wave of nomadic warriors swept across these plains, each leaving their own mark on the land. Some of these invaders would eventually bring down mighty empires, while others vanished without a trace, their stories lost to time. The only clues they left behind are the graves and artifacts, buried deep beneath the steppe, silent witnesses to a forgotten age. But the mysteries of these ancient cultures are far from solved, and every new discovery raises more questions than answers. What secrets are still hidden in the kurgans, waiting to be unearthed? And how did these early peoples shape the destiny of the lands that would one day become Russia and Ukraine? The next chapter in this saga begins as new tribes arrive, bringing with them the seeds of change and the first hints of a nation's birth. As the centuries rolled on, the ancient steppe saw the rise of new peoples who would forever alter the fate of these lands. Among them were the Slavs, a collection of tribes who spoke similar languages but lived in scattered, often isolated communities. Unlike the nomads before them, the Slavs began to settle, cultivating the land and building small villages along the rivers and forests. Yet, despite their shared roots, these tribes were anything but united. Rivalries and feuds were common, and the dream of a single, powerful nation seemed almost impossible. But the story of the Slavs took a dramatic turn with the arrival of outsiders, who would leave an indelible mark on history. From the cold, stormy coasts of Scandinavia came the Varangians, Vikings, known for their daring raids and relentless pursuit of wealth. These warriors were not just plunderers, they were also skilled traders and navigators, rowing their long ships deep into the heart of Eastern Europe along the vast river networks. Their presence was both feared and respected, and their influence quickly spread among the fragmented Slavic tribes. According to legend, it was the East Slavs themselves who reached out to the Varangians in a desperate bid for unity. The story goes that the tribes, wary of constant infighting, invited a Varangian chief named Rurik to rule over them and bring order to their lands. Rurik accepted the call, establishing his capital at Novgorod, and laying the foundation for a dynasty that would last for centuries. His followers began to call themselves the Rus, a name that would echo through history and eventually give rise to the word Russia. But the true origins of the Rus remain a subject of heated debate. Some historians argue that the Rus were purely Scandinavian, while others claim they were a blend of Slavic and Norse cultures. There are even theories suggesting that the name Rus comes from an ancient Finnish word for rowers, a nod to the Varangians' mastery of river travel. Whatever the truth, the arrival of Rurik and his kin marked a turning point, a moment when the scattered tribes began to coalesce into something greater. Yet, this new unity was fragile, and the path ahead was anything but certain. As the Rus established their rule, new challenges and opportunities emerged, setting the stage for the rise of a powerful state that would soon capture the world's attention. But before that could happen, the city of Kiev would become the heart of a new empire, and the story of the Rus would take an unexpected and dramatic turn. With the foundation laid by Rurik and his successors, the scattered tribes of the Rus began to transform into something far greater than anyone could have imagined. The next great leap came with Rurik's successor Oleg, a figure whose ambition and cunning would change the course of history. Oleg set his sights on the city of Kiev, a strategic stronghold perched on the banks of the Dnieper River. Through a mix of diplomacy, force, and legendary trickery, Oleg seized Kiev and declared it the new capital of the Rus. This bold move shifted the center of power southward and set the stage for the rise of Kievan Rus, a state that would soon become one of the most influential in all of Europe. Kiev's location was no accident. The city sat at the crossroads of vital trade routes, linking the icy north to the wealthy empires of the south. Caravans and riverboats carried goods, ideas, and people from Byzantium, the Islamic world, and beyond. This constant flow of commerce brought prosperity, but it also exposed the Rus to new cultures and powerful neighbors. It was during this era that a momentous decision would forever alter the spiritual and political landscape of the region. Vladimir the Great, a ruler known for both his ruthlessness and vision, saw an opportunity to strengthen his state by forging closer ties with the mighty Byzantine Empire. In a move that shocked his contemporaries, Vladimir converted to Orthodox Christianity, bringing his people with him. The mass baptism of the Rus marked a turning point. As churches rose alongside pagan shrines and a new faith began to take root, Vladimir's conversion was more than a religious gesture, was a calculated act of statecraft. By aligning with Byzantium, he secured powerful allies and access to the empire's sophisticated culture, art, and technology. The Rus adopted the Cyrillic script, built grand cathedrals, and sent their sons to learn from Byzantine scholars. This infusion of knowledge and faith helped Kievan Rus flourish, setting it apart from its rivals and earning it a reputation as a beacon of civilization on the edge of the known world. The Golden Age of Kievan Rus reached its height under Yaroslav the Wise, a ruler whose name still commands respect centuries later. Yaroslav codified laws, expanded the state's borders, and fostered a climate of learning and culture. Under his reign, Kiev became a city of glittering domes and bustling markets, rivaling the great capitals of Europe. Foreign envoys and merchants flocked to the city, drawn by its wealth and the promise of opportunity. The Rus princes forged alliances through marriage with the royal families of France, Norway, and even the Byzantine emperor himself. For a brief, shining moment, Kievan Rus stood as one of the most sophisticated and powerful states in Europe, a land where east met west, and where ambitions seemed to know no bounds. But beneath the surface, cracks were already beginning to show. The very prosperity that made Kievan Rus a magnet for trade and culture also attracted the envy of its neighbors and the ambitions of its own princes. After Yaroslav's death, the unity he had worked so hard to build began to unravel. His sons, each hungry for power, turned against one another in a bitter struggle for control. The once mighty states splintered into a patchwork of feuding princedoms, each ruled by a rival branch of the royal family. The Golden Age faded, replaced by a period of instability and infighting. Yet, even as the state fractured, the legacy of Kievan Rus endured. The memory of its Golden Age would inspire future generations, and its achievements in law, religion, and culture would echo through the centuries. But as the princes fought among themselves, a new and deadly threat was gathering strength far to the east, a force that would soon sweep across the steppe with a fury no one could have predicted. The Mongols were coming, and the world of the Rus was about to be changed forever. As the Golden Age of Kievan Rus faded into memory, the land was left vulnerable, fractured by the ambitions of rival princes and weakened by years of internal strife. The unity that had once made the state a beacon of power and culture was now a distant dream. Each prince guarded his territory jealously, forging and breaking alliances in a relentless struggle for dominance. The once mighty capital of Kiev, now just one of many competing centers, watched as its influence slipped away. It was a time of uncertainty, and few could have predicted the storm that was about to sweep across the steppe from the distant east. A new and terrifying force was on the move. The Mongols, led by the legendary Genghis Khan and his ruthless descendants, had already carved a path of destruction across Asia. Their armies moved with a speed and ferocity that seemed almost supernatural, overwhelming kingdoms and empires that had stood for centuries. For the princes of the Rus, the Mongol threat was both distant and unimaginable until it arrived at their very doorstep. The first encounter came in the form of a great raid across the Caucasus Mountains. The Mongols, testing the strength of the Rus, clashed with their armies at the Battle of the Kalka River. The result was a disaster for the Rus princes, who were crushed by the Mongol onslaught. Yet, in a twist that left many breathing a sigh of relief, the invaders withdrew as suddenly as they had appeared. For a brief moment, it seemed as if the threat had passed, but this was only the beginning. 14 years later, the Mongols returned, this time with a force unlike anything the region had ever seen. Led by Bata Khan, a grandson of Genghis Khan, the Mongol hordes swept across the land with relentless fury. Cities that dared to resist were burned to the ground, their people slaughtered or driven into exile. The devastation was total, and the message was clear: submission or destruction. The city of Novgorod, sensing the futility of resistance, chose to submit and was spared the fate of its neighbors. But for most of the Rus, there was no escape from the Mongol wrath. In the midst of this chaos, a new hero emerged, Alexander Nevsky, the Prince of Novgorod. While he submitted to Mongol rule to save his city, he also proved himself a formidable defender against other threats. When the Teutonic Knights, a powerful crusading order from the west, sought to exploit the region's weakness, Nevsky met them in battle on the frozen surface of Lake Pape. The legendary battle on the ice ended in a stunning victory for the Rus, cementing Nevsky's reputation as one of Russia's greatest heroes. His ability to navigate the treacherous politics of the time, balancing submission to the Mongols with resistance to Western invaders, became a model for survival in an age of turmoil. The Mongols, now firmly in control, established their own empire over the conquered lands. Known as the Golden Horde, this new power ruled from the city of Sarai, demanding tribute from the Rus princes and enforcing their will through the threat of devastating reprisals. The Rus called this period the Tata Yoke, a time of humiliation and hardship, when their rulers were little more than vassals to a distant Khan. Yet, even under this oppressive regime, seeds of change were being sown. One of the most significant developments was the rise of Moscow. Founded by Alexander Nevsky's son Daniel, the city began as a minor principality but quickly grew in power and influence. Its strategic location, combined with the political savvy of its rulers, allowed Moscow to become a center of resistance and ambition. Over time, the princes of Moscow learned to play the Mongols' game, using diplomacy, tribute, and occasional defiance to expand their own authority. As the Golden Horde began to fracture into rival khanates, Moscow seized every opportunity to assert its independence. The Mongol invasion had left the land scarred, and its people traumatized, but it had also set the stage for a new era. The old order was gone, swept away by fire and sword. In its place, a new power was rising, one that would eventually cast off the Tatar yoke and lay the foundations for the Russian state. But the road to freedom would be long and perilous, marked by further battles, betrayals, and the relentless struggle for survival. The next chapter would see Moscow challenge its former masters, claim the mantle of leadership, and begin the transformation from a humble principality to the heart of a vast empire. The shadow of the Mongol yoke hung heavy over the lands of the Rus, shaping every aspect of life for generations. The Golden Horde's grip was absolute. Tribute was demanded with ruthless efficiency, and any hint of rebellion was met with swift, brutal reprisals. The princes of the Rus, once proud rulers, were reduced to vassals, forced to travel to the Khan's distant court at Sarai to beg for their right to govern. The humiliation was profound, and the scars of this era would linger for centuries. Yet, even in the darkest times, the seeds of resistance and renewal were quietly taking root. It was during this period of subjugation that Moscow began its remarkable ascent. Founded by Daniel, the son of Alexander Nevsky, Moscow was initially just one of many minor principalities, but its rulers proved to be masters of survival and strategy. They paid tribute when necessary, forged alliances with powerful neighbors, and, when the moment was right, defied the Khan's authority. The city's location, protected by forests and rivers, made it a natural stronghold, and its princes were quick to exploit every opportunity to expand their influence. As the Golden Horde's power began to wane, Moscow's ambitions grew bolder. Under the leadership of Ivan I, known as Ivan Moneybags for his shrewd financial dealings, Moscow became the chief collector of tribute for the Mongols, a position that brought both wealth and political leverage. The city's coffers swelled, and its walls grew higher. Over time, Moscow began to absorb neighboring territories, often through cunning diplomacy or outright force. The once fragmented Rus were slowly being drawn together under a single banner. Meanwhile, the world beyond the steppe was changing in ways that would have profound consequences for the Rus. In 1453, Constantinople, the last outpost of the Byzantine Empire and the spiritual heart of Orthodox Christianity, fell to the Ottoman Turks. The shockwaves from this event rippled across Europe, but nowhere were they felt more deeply than in Moscow. With Rome and Constantinople both lost, some began to see Moscow as the third Rome, the last true guardian of the Orthodox faith. This idea took hold, fueling a sense of destiny and exceptionalism that would shape Russian identity for centuries to come. The princes of Moscow embraced this new role with zeal. Ivan III, known as Ivan the Great, led the charge to cast off the Mongol yoke once and for all. In a dramatic standoff at the Ugra River, Ivan faced down the Tatar army and forced them to retreat without a fight, a moment that would be remembered as the symbolic end of Mongol domination. Freed from foreign rule, Moscow moved quickly to consolidate its gains. Novgorod, once a rival power, was annexed, and the first true Russian state began to take shape. But the struggle for power was far from over. The Tatars, now divided into rival khanates, continued to threaten the borders, launching devastating raids and burning cities to the ground. The Grand Duchy of Lithuania, sensing an opportunity, pushed eastward, capturing Kiev and challenging Moscow's authority. The battle for supremacy was fierce, with shifting alliances and betrayals at every turn. Yet, through it all, Moscow's influence continued to grow, driven by a combination of military might, religious fervor, and sheer determination. The legacy of the Tatar yoke was complex. On one hand, it had brought suffering and humiliation. On the other, it had forced the Rus to adapt, to become more resilient and resourceful. The experience of living under foreign domination forged a new sense of unity and purpose, a determination to never again be ruled by outsiders. As Moscow emerged as the center of power, it carried with it the lessons of the past and the ambition to shape the future. The stage was now set for the next great transformation. With the Mongols in retreat and the dream of a united Russian state within reach, a new era of expansion, conflict, and ambition was about to begin. The rise of the Tsars would bring both glory and terror, as the rulers of Moscow sought to build an empire that would rival the greatest in history. But the scars of the past would not be easily forgotten, and the struggle for identity, power, and survival. The dawn of the Tsarist era brought both hope and horror to the Russian lands. Ivan IV, crowned as the first Tsar of Russia, would go down in history as Ivan the Terrible, a ruler whose name still sends chills down the spine. At first, Ivan's reign was marked by bold reforms and sweeping modernization. He conquered the Tatar strongholds of Kazan and Astrakhan, pushing Russia's borders further than ever before. But the promise of progress soon gave way to a reign of terror. Consumed by paranoia and rage, Ivan unleashed a wave of violence that left the nobility shattered and the common people living in fear. His infamous Oprichnina, secret police force, loyal only to him, carried out mass executions, torture, and the destruction of entire towns. Even his own son was not spared, bludgeoned to death in a fit of fury that shocked the nation. Amid this chaos, new forces began to shape the Russian frontier. The Cossacks, fierce and independent horsemen, carved out a life on the lawless steppe between warring empires, sometimes outlaws, sometimes mercenaries. The Cossacks became both a threat and an asset to the Tsars, fighting for whoever could offer them the most freedom or reward. Their daring raids and legendary exploits would become the stuff of folklore. But their presence also signaled the growing instability of the region, As Ivan's health declined and his dynasty faltered, Russia teetered on the edge of disaster. The death of his heir left a power vacuum, and the once mighty Rurikid line came to a sudden, violent end. The throne passed to Boris Godunov, but his rule was plagued by suspicion, famine, and the rise of impostors claiming royal blood. The country slid into the infamous time of troubles, a period of anarchy, foreign invasion, and near total collapse. Cities burned, famine swept the land, and the very survival of the Russian state hung by a thread. The chaos of Ivan's legacy would haunt Russia for generations, setting the stage for even greater struggles and the eventual rise of a new dynasty. The death of Ivan the Terrible's heir marked the beginning of one of the darkest chapters in Russian history, the time of troubles. With the Rurikid dynasty extinguished, the throne became a prize for anyone bold or desperate enough to seize it. Boris Godunov's brief rule was marred by suspicion and disaster. Famine swept across the land, decimating the population and fueling unrest. As hunger and disease spread, rumors and paranoia took hold, and the fragile order that had held the state together began to unravel. Into this chaos stepped a series of each claiming to be the rightful heir to the throne. These so-called false Dimitris stirred up rebellion and drew support from foreign powers, eager to exploit Russia's weakness. The country became a battleground for rival factions, mercenaries, and invading armies. Polish troops marched into Moscow, while Swedish forces seized Novgorod, carving up the once mighty state as if it were little more than a prize for the taking. Lawlessness reigned, and the people suffered as never before. The devastation was almost total. Cities were burned, villages abandoned, and entire regions left desolate. Famine and plague claimed countless lives, and the very survival of the Russian state seemed in doubt. For a time, it looked as if Russia might simply vanish from the map, torn apart by internal strife and foreign ambition. Yet, even in the midst of this nightmare, a stubborn resilience endured. Small bands of patriots and local leaders began to rally the people, determined to drive out the invaders and restore order. The time of troubles would eventually end, but its scars would linger for generations. The chaos and suffering of these years forced Russia to confront its own fragility and the dangers of division. As the dust settled, a new dynasty would rise from the ashes, determined to rebuild and reclaim the nation's lost glory. But the memory of near extinction would haunt the Russian soul, a reminder of just how close the land had come to disappearing forever. And as the world changed around them, the people of Russia would never forget the lessons learned in their darkest hour. The story of Russia and Ukraine's origins is a saga of survival, ambition, and relentless change. From the silent kurgans of the ancient steppe to the glittering domes of Kiev, from the terror of Mongol invasions to the chaos of the time of troubles, these lands have been shaped by forces both seen and unseen. Every era brought new challenges, foreign conquerors, internal betrayals, and the constant struggle for unity. Yet, through it all, the people endured, adapting to each new threat and forging a unique identity from the ashes of disaster. Even now, the secrets of the past remain buried beneath the soil, hidden in ancient graves, lost manuscripts, and the ruins of forgotten cities. Historians still debate the true origins of the Ruskta, the real motives behind legendary rulers, and the untold stories of those who lived and died in the shadows of empires. Rumors persist of lost treasures, undiscovered tombs, and ancient texts that could rewrite everything we think we know about these lands. What truths are still waiting to be uncovered, and how much of the past has been lost forever, erased by war, time, and the ambitions of those who came after. As Russia and Ukraine moved beyond the time of troubles, a new era would dawn, one marked by the rise of powerful dynasties, sweeping reforms, and the relentless drive to expand and survive. But the echoes of the past never truly faded. The scars left by centuries of conflict and upheaval continued to shape the destinies of these nations, reminding them that history is never really finished. The mysteries of the steppe, the legends of the Rus, and the lessons of survival still linger, challenging us to look deeper and question what we think we know. In the end, the story of these lands is not just about kings and conquerors, but about the enduring spirit of a people who refused to be erased by time.